Hewitt. Super. Hi, everyone. My name is Tess. I'm head of market research at HealthXl, and I'll be your host for this webinar on the potential of AI for drug discovery. So the drug discovery process, as I'm sure many of the audience knows, has traditionally been extremely costly and very time-consuming. But a new wave of AI-based solution promises not just speedier identification of new targets and drugs, but also a more efficient discovery process. This new AI-based technology also has the ability to solve more complex biological problems where current approaches have not yielded fruit. The transformative potential of AI explains why so many new companies are venturing into the field. But really, one question on everyone's mind, and probably the most pertinent question for this audience, really is about how this new technology will change pharma's core business. I'm delighted to be joined today by an expert panel representing biopharma, biotech, and the VC community. The panel discussion today will focus on what AI means for the drug discovery industry, how does pharma partner in AI for drug discovery, and what are some of the do's and the don'ts when approaching pharma for long-term collaboration. We'll also talk about the future, and I hope to get expert insights on what the future holds for AI and drug discovery. For the audience, please feel free to use the Q&A or chat function. Hopefully I'll get to some of your questions later in the webinar. But before we get started, Katie, Kevin, and Armen, it would be really great if you could briefly introduce yourselves to the audience. Maybe Katie, you can kick us off.
Hi, I am Katie Hewitt. I am currently at Eli Lilly and Company, leading one of our business units within our corporate business development arm of the company. What we do is we go out and we look to find the best technology and the best science wherever it may be in the world, and build collaboration with partner companies in order to create the most value possible. So very nice to be here. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you, Kevin.
Yeah, thanks, Tess. Hi, everyone. My name is Kevin Arias. I'm a co-founder of AbCellera, which is a biotech company working in the space of biologics. I've been leading the business development activities for a number of years. I've had the chance to strike several deals and see one side of the deal making from a biotech perspective. I'm an advisor for a biotech pharma on business and strategy matters.
Thanks, Kevin. Armen? You're mute.
There we are. Armen Vidian. I'm a venture capitalist sitting at the intersection of technology, specifically deep tech, which includes AI, but is really a combination of several fields of engineering and mathematics, including 3D printing, semiconductors, cloud and edge computing, and so on. I spent close to 7 years at venture firm DCVC, which was one of the first firms to invest in AI-based companies. I've now left to start something new in venture capital at the intersection of healthcare and technology, to be announced later. My background by education is as an engineer and in applied math, and by work experience, I spent a couple of decades in product management and business development roles in medical device and integrated pharma and medical device companies.
Super. Thanks, Armen. Well, we're delighted to have you, and I'm excited for this conversation. So we'll spend the next 55 minutes really focusing on three kind of key themes, really. Where are we now? How do we partner? And where are we headed? So I'll kick us off maybe with one important clarifier. In the context of AI drug discovery, what is AI and what is it not? Or maybe, Kevin, you can kick us off.
Sure. I think AI has been a new way of analyzing very large data sets and has been applied to the drug discovery process. We've witnessed over the past, I would say, 10, 20 years, the generation of those very large data sets with new technologies, whether it's next generation sequencing, very high throughput imaging platforms, and the likes. And this has generated a vast amount of information that is difficult to analyze and extract information from using typical processes. So AI and in science, machine learning, and different types of algorithms really help in that sense, speed up and make the drug discovery more efficient. And probably where many biotech companies start and then get integrated into the larger biopharma ecosystem.
Great.
I also think that oftentimes AI is mistaken for software in general. And I think that entrepreneurs should be careful just when they're talking to venture capitalists about AI. They should be really certain to say, what exactly do they mean by that? What are the data sets that they're using? What unique insights are they getting from that they can't get from other means? So be sure to understand exactly, who you're talking to when you go talk to venture capitalists about AI, and be sure to discern between the various different subspecialties of deep learning, machine learning, and so on, so that you can give an articulate vision for where machine learning and AI may fit into your company.
Thanks. Katie, anything to round that off?
I concur.
Good. So how does the use of AI change then the way R&D teams work in pharma?
I can take that since I'm in pharma.
Representing pharma.
Lilly has been around for over 150 years. And so that means we've got 150 years of discovery data sets and development data sets and clinical data and commercial data. The only way to get years of patient longitudinal data, is to follow patients over time. So companies like Lilly have tremendous data sets at our disposal, and we see AI as an opportunity to extract new insights and draw new conclusions from existing data that we could never really get before, just due to the sheer speed of drug discovery and drug development. So I think there's opportunities to do different experiments to both expedite the work that's being done, do the work differently, ask better questions, pick better candidates for trials or for really any aspect of drug discovery and drug development. There's probably not an area where I couldn't see AI potentially helping us be more efficient and more effective in getting drugs to market and getting them to the patients that need them.
Yeah. Kevin? Armen?
Yeah, I think AI, at least from a biotech perspective, has initiated, I think, the creation of many new companies that are based on new platforms, on new technologies. And as Katie mentioned, this gets integrated into a broader ecosystem where maybe from a discovery perspective, it's the identification and the selection of lead molecules. But on the other side of the spectrum, it's the ability to help inform maybe clinical trials or using large data sets on that front to apply molecules or develop new molecules. I think we'll talk about this, but one of the distinction to make is that also AI has been applied to many different new modalities, therapeutic modalities, and there's also a difference depending on what you're looking at and where we are, I guess, now in 2023 with that approach.
It's interesting because I work with a lot of course, small startups in their earliest stages, and that's where I invest. And a deep tech centric team really changes what is central to the team and how it's organized and the goals around what is being built, especially in some of these small startups. So to an AI centric team led by a tech leader, it's about how thorough the technology is, for example, at scraping the search space, or how well it's identifying novel relationships between different biological structures. And that's what is important to that sort of team. And that may be different from what is important to a biologically centric team, which is looking around a set of particular biological mechanisms of action and what they value. So if you look at that biologically centric team, it might be really understanding thorough a particular mechanism of action and the goal of a core set of people within that around which there's kind of an aha moment, right? The AI-centric team may be very focused on how it is that their tool is identifying potential candidates. And so culturally, that's a different set of values. And it means when they talk to each other, they have to be sure they're using a common language. So that's really important as you look at companies in this space.
Okay. And how does the use of AI change the core business, and how does it impact the drug portfolio? Katie, if you'd like to.
I don't know that it's acceleration, right, is the key. We're able to answer scientific questions with AI that couldn't be answered before because there wasn't sufficient time and resources to go through the vast amounts of data that we have. So I think it fundamentally changes the questions that we can answer and the speed at which we can answer them, and hopefully unlock new insights and ideally shorten the amount of time it takes from discovery of a medicine to the time when it's available to patients worldwide.
If I may, I think it does two things for sure. And just to reinforce what Katie just said, I think it does, the first thing it does is it creates new businesses. And on the existing businesses, it helps speed up and make the process more efficient. I was involved at a company called AbCellera, where we applied a lot of AI technology for the discovery of new biologics. But I think we've seen companies like Recursion or Exscientia, for example, really demonstrate that they can select small molecules and move them very quickly into the clinic in the matter of months, as opposed to the years we're typically used to. AbCellera has done this as well. And I think these are the very practical and true examples of how businesses have been affected, created, or how this has been integrated into the broader ecosystem.
Kevin brings up two really great examples, his own former company, AbCellera, and Recursion. And I like to say that all challenges and problems are really human, not technical. And what I think that AbCellera and Recursion have done so very, very well is also address a human challenge of bringing together these two different groups to create a very different kind of business, such as AbCellera is, and making sure that they stand on equal footing as engineers, mathematicians, and biological scientists. Because making sure they all have an equal seat at the table, making sure they all have a voice in how the company moves forward, is often the biggest challenge any company in this space can face. And that's not to say that companies that don't have AI and don't have computer scientists don't face their own challenges and are unique in their own regard, but it does mean that the language that many people haven't often been educated in back in school does need to be shared, that there needs to be a common set of values, and that strong sense of community around that is critical toward their success.
Thanks. We already have a question from the audience, and I actually will move to that just because it ties in nicely with what I was going to ask you anyway. But this person would love to hear your thoughts on the upcoming advancements in AI with different drug modalities. We are beginning to see AI being used more and more beyond small molecule drug discovery and in other modalities like biologics. What are you most excited about in 2023?
I can go ahead with one of those. I think that we need to see AI applied to some of the other elements of the drug discovery and development process. So, for example, when we think about some of the cell and gene therapies where there's some AI applied to some of the discovery, I also think that I'm really looking to see how it can be applied toward manufacturing and some of the other elements, delivery for some of those therapies, because I think they could use that as well. And I also think that I'm really looking forward to continuing to see more companies like the success that companies like Unlearn AI have developed in the clinical development process. So that's really where I'm looking to see some future developments.
Great. Katie?
Well, the question is specific to 2023. I think it's right over the next, 5 years in the newer areas and the genetic medicine, gene therapy, cell therapy. It may take a while to get the large data sets that we have available for small molecules, and for large molecules, it's easier to get 5 to 10 years of longitudinal data for those new modalities. So I think it's the amount of research done in whatever modality it is, as soon as there's sufficient data, where pharma companies can collaborate with companies like AbCellera or other external partners. Really, the sky's the limit.
Yeah, I would concur with this comment as well. I think if we were to plot the new modalities that have been coming online over the past few years, there's really an acceleration in the trend to generate new modalities very quickly. Now, how can we use AI to really make sure those modalities become really successful therapeutics? This is really what's exciting. I think we're seeing small molecules as the place to start. This is a space that's really well understood. There's a lot of information. Molecules can be assessed, tested very efficiently, and the chemical space can be explored. We're seeing more and more of biologics being developed and using combination with AI. And as Katie mentioned, I think nucleic acid types of molecules, mRNA and the likes, the gene therapies are next to benefit from this new way of looking at the data and selecting and progressing molecules towards the clinic.
I also think the antibody discovery space is also going to continue to benefit from AI. We're seeing that from exciting new companies like Lab Genius, which is focusing on bispecific antibodies or antibodies that bind to 2 different targets on 2 different cells. That's going to be really interesting as well.
Great. We've already seen a few AI discovered drugs going into clinical trials. I'd really love to hear your thoughts on this. What are you excited about, and what are you apprehensive about?
I would say that we are just getting started. The first companies to run through the wall and get bloodied, like AbCellera, Recursion, Exscientia, and so on, are the tip of the iceberg, and they have really forged a path for future companies to come in this space. So I think that we're going to see robotics, for example, enter into as combined with AI to predict a succession of experiments to really accelerate the discovery process and birth entire new businesses. There is an unlimited amount of opportunity coming forward. I think that as for anything that I'm apprehensive about, I think, like I said before, I think it's the human challenges that are often the greatest. But really, I think that there's an unlimited amount of opportunity in front of us.
Okay. I'm excited about the opportunity for the things that are getting to the clinic, because those that are enabled through AI are getting there faster than they would have otherwise. There's more information and more insights and more knowledge available to the teams that are taking these products into the clinic. The bar is high to start a human clinical trial. So there's no more or less risk if it comes from AI generated versus generated at the bench and following a more traditional path. I think we're able to ask better questions earlier on and potentially pick better patients to go into those trials to have fewer side effects and just answer a lot of the questions that before we had to wait until we were in human clinical trials to answer. We can either better predict what we think will happen or answer some of those questions before starting the clinical trials, which should hopefully expedite things along the way and enable the right drugs and the right patients to be connected faster than they were before.
Okay. Kevin, what are you excited about or apprehensive about?
Yeah, I think it's the same type of excitement. Maybe another way to say what has been said already, but it's really the integration of all those different parameters that are part of the drug selection process. And really making sure that the molecules are being picked whatever modality it is, they really get into the clinic with the highest chance of success, to not face some very costly disappointment and ultimately not benefiting patients. I think the complex modalities, biologics for one, I think Armen mentioned bispecifics, multispecifics, cocktails, different types of medicines that we haven't seen yet are really exciting. I think there's always a lag between also what is public and what maybe some of us might be seeing in our different discussions. So I think we all see very interesting, exciting things happening, and hopefully these will materialize into successful treatments. But I'm definitely very excited.
I also think imaging, as we look at things like spatial proteomics, is going to continue to play an important role in order to have an understanding of a true picture of the cell. So that's another space that I think is pretty exciting.
Great. And maybe just for the benefit of the audience, would you mind just kind of recapping on some of these early successes of applying AI to drug discovery?
Katie, what have you seen? And then I'll go next with the story.
Well, there was a collaboration between Lilly and AbCellera during the COVID-19 pandemic, and AbCellera, through their work with the government, had access to the first patient sample in the United States from the first person infected with COVID. And through a collaboration with Lilly, there was the fastest acceleration from patient blood draw to commercial launch of a therapeutic ever. Without that collaboration, that would not have been possible. There's no one company that has all the tools needed to enable that kind of speed and those kind of patient outcomes. So I think anytime you can collaborate where 1 + 1 = 4, those are those opportunities to really fundamentally change the experience patients around the world are going to have. And so that's probably my favorite example. It's the most exhausting and exhilarating experience I've had at work, but definitely very rewarding.
Vidian's work putting that together was, it saved lives. And it's an example of done right when there's that collaboration between an early stage discovery company and a big pharma company of what's uniquely powerful for each. And when that comes together, just exactly what can be done and in what scale. When I think of early successes, I remember in 2019 giving a talk in Chicago to a group of people saying that, we can bring the discovery process with a combination of will and technology down to a matter of months. And I remember being laughed at, distinctly laughed at, not laughed with. As people said, that's ridiculous. And then the pandemic hit. And AbCellera, with the help of Lilly, literally did that in a matter of months. And some of that was because of the pandemic, and the sense of urgency it created in all of us to seek solutions. But some of it was the way itself existing, in that, AbCellera really had to start from scratch. And, from the time a contract was inked to getting something into patients in the first phase of the trial, it was a matter of a few months. So this is what happens when we put together our technological capabilities with a sense of urgency. Imagine if we did that for all diseases, just exactly where we'd come, or really all global problems that we face. So that's why, we continue to believe that AI and deep tech is going to be critical in the pharmaceutical community, and why we see this as these same successes with other emerging companies like Recursion, for example, as well.
Yeah, I'll maybe just compliment and say a couple of things, having been on the front seat at AbCellera. So I'm not at the company anymore, but clearly this is I agree, like a very good example of risk that was taken very early on by a biotech company that developed a suite of capabilities. I think we need also to give credit to DARPA, who was the agency in the US, who really also spend a lot of time anticipating that the pandemic would hit at some point, and really wanted to have the capabilities through different groups to make sure that we could find molecules that could help. And then at the time, I think it was very opportunistic, but at the same time almost ideal. Like we had really good business discussions, and then this deal with Lilly made a lot of sense, and it was really needed. So there was also willingness on every side to make this happen and really to help. So that's been a terrific story, and speed was of the essence. And I think 2 molecules were essentially discovered in the space of biology, which is also another feat I think that we probably need to highlight. To Armen's point, I think Recursion ex-Scientia also has shown a couple of times that you can bring small molecules using AI-based approaches, and not being privy to those approaches. I think it's also maybe 2 examples that we need to highlight and showcase, because they've reduced what is typically years of discovery and development into months, which is what AbCellera did with Lilly for the COVID antibodies. But really, probably these are going to become more and more frequent, hopefully as frequent as we can moving forward.
Great. Well, on the topic of partnership, I think probably a lot of people in the audience are very interested in learning more about how you select the right partner in this space. So I guess with so many companies and potential partners in AI drug discovery, how do pharma companies approach partnering for AI drug discovery? And more specifically, maybe what do they look for in these companies or in a good partner?
I probably can't speak to all pharma companies. There's always an exception to the rule, but I think, pharma companies have been around for a long time, and it's difficult to change organizations, right, that are set in their ways. So on the business development side, we're always pushing the envelope a bit, right? Because if it was easy, the company would have already done it. It's not a lack of resources a lot of times. It's just, we have the same number of people working in our labs that we did 10 years ago. It's not fewer people, they're just doing different work. So when we approach partnering, it's really important, I think, that companies can articulate, right, what it is they can do and how they differentiate from the other companies in the space, having a very clear message around, to Armen's point earlier, are you an AI-centric, right, tech team? Is it more working on the biology? Like, where is it that your sweet spot is? And be open as you talk to pharma companies, and be clear about what your interests are, and also be genuinely interested in what are the interests of the pharma companies that you're potentially speaking with. Odds are your technology could solve problems that you didn't even know existed because you haven't sat on the pharma side, right? I have a lot of problems that we could have. Right? There's a lot of opportunity where we could use some help. And it's not that we couldn't do the work ourselves, but there's certain things we're really good at, and certain things where we're just not putting as many resources toward it. My preference, working in business development, is why build it ourselves if we can collaborate with a company that's already built it. And so those that can help us answer really tough scientific questions are the ones that I think are likely prioritized. So I'd say the more that you can make it clear what your technology can and can't do, right? What type of data do you have experience with? But then also being able to articulate, what do you want to grow into? Because if answering the questions I have don't take your company in the direction you want it to go, it's not going to be a really fruitful collaboration. The most successful are the ones where the biotech company wants to go and where pharma wants to go are generally the same direction. Those are the ones I think that move the fastest and yield the highest results.
Armen, what are you seeing then, working with some of these companies? What pharma partners might look for?
So as a board member to several of these companies, or even when I'm not on the board and just helping them be successful, I've worked with them on a lot of these types of arrangements. And there are a few different things that I see that go right or go wrong. The first is knowing what you as the startup company wants, and knowing as well what your partner wants. What does each party want to get out of it? And making sure that both is being addressed. And is it in line with your objectives for your company? I think that too often what I'll see is that startups will partner with a big pharma company because they think that that's what investors want, right? And there may have been a time very early on, several years ago, when perhaps that's what they did want in order to grasp the space. But if it's distracting to your goals and not in line with your strategy, and you're doing some giant project that you don't want to do, odds are you're not going to do a good job for your partner. It's not going to be something that fits your objectives, and your investors aren't going to be impressed. So make sure that you know all of those things going into it. Focus on what your core competencies are as a business, and again, know what your partners are too, so that you can know what the relative strengths are that you're going to bring to the table to make a partnership truly meaningful and successful. And also, people ask, when should we partner with a firm? When should we approach them? Go when you know that when you have that clear vision, and you can say it aloud and it makes sense to you, your investors, and others you work with. Kevin, what am I missing in that list, by the way? Katie, from your experience?
Well, maybe I can try to take this one. I think you made really good comments, and Katie as well. I think from a biotech perspective, and some of the companies I'm still in discussion with, what's really important is to crystallize what is the benefit that a biotech might bring to a pharma company. I think Katie mentioned this, but pharma companies, they have a lot of resources, they have a lot of people working, and they have access to a lot of technologies, and they're obviously always on the lookout for new ways of doing things and better ways of doing them. So when you're a company that is coming up, I think being able to really present the value of a technology, of an asset, in a very concise and precise way is probably the best way to approach those large groups. I remember when we started AbCellera, platform companies were not so exciting to many groups. And I think over the past few years, we've seen the rise of those companies that we initially developed platforms, secure them via deals or partnership with large groups, just to secure a little bit of non-dilutive funding, but at the same time get some credibility when being successful with the partnership, and then move forward and develop their own assets. And this is really a practical way of seeing the business development and partnership aspect to identify partners that can be very helpful depending on where you're in your growth stage. And then as you become more successful, maybe look for more strategic deals or partnerships, because as a biotech or an emerging company, you can very much benefit from a large pharmaceutical company. I think we go back to this example with Vidian and AbCellera, but AbCellera brought up a new platform, a new way of discovering an asset, and Lilly as a pharmaceutical company is obviously had all the resources to manufacture and produce the molecule. So being able to visualize all of this very quickly and efficiently, and being able to present it, I think it, for me, is key when you're on the biotech or emerging company side.
Can we spend a bit more time on these kind of do's and don'ts of, approaching a pharma for, say, a long-term collaboration? So I think we spoke a little bit about the timing, but maybe more specifically, who would you go to and kind of how would you approach them?
I'm sorry, I just lost the sound for like the last 30 seconds. I did not hear the question.
Oh, sorry. So I just wanted us to spend a bit more time on these do's and don'ts of the partnership building or the deal making. So we spoke about the timing of this a little bit, but who would you target and how would you approach them? Stakeholder
within, like, who in terms of like what type of companies, or
who in terms of even the type of person, the stakeholder who's your best bet, I suppose, of making this happen?
Well, that'll vary by company. So I would encourage everyone to ask, right, about the process being used. When I meet a new biotech company, one of the first things I ask is, how are decisions made? Because if we can, right, get alignment on what we want to do, understanding who the key stakeholders are within the biotech. It could be the CEO, it could be the board of directors, it could be the venture capital firms that are currently invested. A lot of times companies are worried about what their future potential investors, right, will want to understand. So I think it's, and then similarly, when you talk to big pharma, no big pharma is created equal, and right, decision-making changes depending on even the area of the company, right? Within Lilly, the decision-making process varies between our different therapeutic areas, depending on the stage of, right, development, discovery, an asset is in. Is it a large molecule or small molecule? So make sure you understand how the decisions are made. And it should be something, right? Me sharing the details of a process is really easy. It's not confidential information. We could share that here on the webinar, right? If there was a specific question. So never hesitate to ask about the process that's going to be used and the, right, to set reasonable expectations to make sure that the right people are engaged at the right time, but not too early, right? Because again, you don't want to get too many people involved too early on. I think it'll just slow things down. So having a really good understanding of timing and decision making on both sides of the table is critical to getting a transaction done.
What are some of the challenges in deal making? When should you be mindful of signing a deal and executing it? Any learnings you can share with the audience?
I don't know that there's anything easy about deal making. I mean, drug discovery and development is difficult, and doing it in collaboration with another party always makes it, right, more complicated and more challenging. So, you know, if you can tell pretty early on if there's really good chemistry between your company, right, and the company you're considering collaborating with. If you don't have good chemistry during the negotiations, the odds that it's going to be different in implementation are pretty low. So, right, I think it's in a real collaboration, both parties have aligned incentives, right? And the give and take is easier than if you enter into a collaboration with different incentives, right, and a different idea of what success looks like. That's likely not going to be successful in any way. It's going to be an uncomfortable, right, relationship for both parties. So I think there's so many different areas we could go in. Kevin, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think what you said earlier about making sure both sides understand each other, you know, taking the time to build the relationship and understand who's doing what and who are going to be the stakeholder in a possible deal is the first step. So it takes a bit of time and getting acquainted and understanding really the technology and the people and the culture. And then what you said, again, I think is right. There's no one size fits all for deal making. Every time it is different. This is a difficult business. It's a business of discovering medicine, and it has a big impact. It has the potential to have a big impact, but it's not templated, and things are moving all the time. So technology is moving, deals moving, priorities are moving, and you really have to make sure that you understand this very well so that you can strike the deal when it makes sense. And in some cases, you have also to be able to walk away and, you know, just keep in touch and just say, look, it's maybe not the right moment or the right time to do this deal, and let's keep in touch. And this is, I think, from my perspective, is what is really critical when you start, or at least when you're on the early stage or biotech side, is that you're not going to be partnering with everybody in the space. You're really going to have to pick some groups you want to work with, and over the years, those relationships develop and get deeper, or in some cases, just move on.
Well, and I think focusing on, you know, focus your transactions on the area where collaboratively you can create value. If we're working with an early stage company that's helping discover a new molecule, that could be, right, 10 or 15 years before you go to the commercial market. Don't worry about a co-commercialization deal if you don't have a sales force, right? Adding in the extra complexity that you think looks good for investors is just going to greatly expedite the timeline. And, right, as a pharma company, if you don't have a commercial capability, it's really difficult for me to talk to my leadership about a co-commercialization deal. So I would say keep your My favorite collaborators are those that we can do multiple transactions with. It's more efficient. Teams are already working together. So even if you have to start small, better to start small and do something that will yield success versus trying to cover too much ground. The transactions will take a long time and I think are unlikely to actually give the biotech companies or the pharma companies the results that you're looking for.
It's all about, like Katie said earlier, if the courtship is going to be like the marriage, right? So if it's not based in a good trust and you feel like you'll have aligned objectives early on, it's probably not going to work out later. So, as for signing anything you don't want to sign, if you know what your objectives are and why you're there, that question will be easy.
And how do you kind of, keep the marriage happy? I suppose, what tends to be the tipping point, from going from a short term to a more long-term collaboration? Is there anything you can share with the audience in that regard?
Success, right? If you can do a small collaboration and it's successful, you have demonstrated track record of results. So it's much easier to expand upon a collaboration that's going well than to start something that's new and novel, right, for either company. So key stakeholders, I think in both the biotech and the pharma company, will be more comfortable if they've got some evidence of successful work done in the past.
Yeah, I agree. I think this makes a lot of sense. Like finding a good place to start and then demonstrate success. That's the best starting point for an expansion or further development of a deal. Once the group get to know each other, both on the scientific side, on the business side, the leadership, like there's trust, as Armen mentioned, that has been created, and everybody's essentially steering in the same direction, as opposed to maybe at earlier stages where you have to break this wall of credibility or trust and make sure that everybody understands each other's priorities.
Great.
Oftentimes what I'll find too is that sometimes a short-term collaboration will be set up without clear objectives on what the business impact or clinical impact is to the organization or partner. So, for example, make sure that your short-term collaboration doesn't just show that the technology works, but that it also has an impact in the organization that somebody can say to management, this was important to us. Otherwise, you've just proven that your technology works. Make sure that the objectives are in place so we can more likely flow into a longer-term collaboration.
And
Nice.
maybe just to finish, sorry, I just wanted to say that the business incentives should be fair for both sides, because there's obviously an opportunity cost for a large group, mid-sized group, or small group, and I think this is very often where a lot of the business discussions really get into very lengthy discussions, really to make sure that this is aligned, because the scientific work at some point becomes very well defined, and the business incentives really need to make sure that you work for the business model the companies are after. And once the deal is struck, as we've discussed before, this is an industry where the cycles are really long. So this really comes into play, and the deal that is being struck needs to make sense a year later, 5 years later, or maybe 10 years later even.
Great. Maybe we could spend the rest of our conversation just on, the excitement around AI versus what's real now, and maybe, going into the future a little bit. I know we did already at the start, but it'd be great to spend a bit more time on it. I guess my opening question on this section is really, where along the adoption cycle are we with AI in drug discovery? Where are we? Where are we headed?
I can go first with that one. I think thinking of whether AI is real and whether it's here or not is really a red herring for a couple of other greater questions. I think that two in particular, I think that some of the questions around AI-based drug discovery companies have really come out of, excuse me, what's going on in the public markets. Mm-hmm. And I think that if you take a look at that, well, the public markets are if you take a lot of the companies, their platforms are working as expected, their drugs are working as expected. So it's nothing those companies are doing that is off plan, but really it's the larger macro where you're looking at drugs that have a 7 to 10 year, life as they go through the process, that can get a little bit more affected by the macro. So I think that that's not really any demonstrative proof as to whether or not AI-based companies are succeeding. And in fact, when the market is used to looking at companies on an individual drug by drug basis and those fortunes, it takes a while for them to figure out what these platforms are. I also think that whether AI is here to stay is really kind of, again, a red herring for another question, which is around how are we going to adapt to these new technologies? So in other words, how are we going to get comfortable with the fact that we're simulating millions of different types of biological actions, and our brains just are not going to be able to process that like the tools we are building are. And that means that we're going to have to adapt to a different set of assumptions. And again, that comes back to how are we constructing those teams so we can both answer the technical and the critical important biological questions that make a drug a drug. ADME tox, safety profile, all of these sorts of things that ensure that when you take a medication from Lilly, for example, it's safe and effective. So these are the sorts of things that we need to adapt to as these companies come to market. And finally, I think that AI is going to be one piece of a component set of tools, including AI, but including other technologies such as robotics that are going to really change how it is that we're looking at the modern pharmaceutical company. My colleagues, do you have anything to add to that? I'm happy to be challenged on that too.
Katie, maybe you want to go?
Okay, I think, I don't know that I disagree, right, any of that, Armen. I think as you look at, from a pharmaceutical company standpoint, once a product is moving forward in the development life cycle, it doesn't really matter if it came from AI or elsewhere. We ask the same questions, right? Yep. At each stage in discovery. A large molecule will need to have certain properties and specific attributes in order to continue to move forward. So I would say, at the macro view, that's what companies like Lilly look at every day. And if you collaborate with a bigger company, you don't have to necessarily understand the macro environment and be thinking what's going to happen 10 years down the road. That's what we're thinking about, right? How do you collaborate with companies like Lilly earlier on? Again, I think as Armen said, where's the sweet spot of what you can do really well? And if you can help add value there and expedite the process, there'll be enough value created, right, that both parties can share in it. So I don't know that my company will look at AI-derived molecules any differently than those from elsewhere. We just want the best science, right, to get to patients as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I might just add that, just to answer the question you asked about the adoption cycle, I think it's probably difficult to pinpoint exactly where we are. But maybe fair to say that, when we look at what has happened, I think if you look at probably all the major pharmaceutical companies, the Lillys and others, all of them have struck deals with AI-based in some way companies. I think some of these companies have shown, I think we go back to the Recursion, the AbCellera, the Exscientia, some of them have shown that you can use AI-based processes. It's not only that, but in large part, it's based on those processes, help companies find new drugs and probably make fewer mistakes. So where we are, we're probably at a phase where, it's been demonstrated, value has been shown, we can find assets that can be turned into valuable molecules. We haven't seen, I think, a lot of M&A yet, or very, very solid, I would say, consolidation in the space, and there's still a lot of questions. I'm very curious about the different areas in the drug discovery process where AI can be applied on the very, very early stage. Target ID is the wall of biology. Essentially, it's still very, very complex, and being able to get answers, pick better targets is obviously very valuable. Selecting the best leads, whether it's a small molecule, a large molecule, a gene therapy, a cell therapy, this is where many companies play with their toolbox essentially and select leads. And then when you look at the other side, and then Katie has probably way more insight, but using very large data sets in the clinical trial space to maybe also find new insight. Those three areas to me are very very interesting, and I remain curious to see what we're going to see on those buckets, I would say.
I think the lack of M&A might be a good thing, because if Lilly were to acquire a company, the platform is only going to have access to Lilly data sets. The longer these companies stay independent, right, the power comes from multiple data sets from multiple different sources, and as through collaboration, right, as platforms learn and get smarter, all collaboration partners yield the benefit, right, of the learning from the various data sets. So the more data you have, the more powerful your platform can become, and the more everyone can learn from it. So I think the collaboration model early on for companies is definitely the way to go. And a big differentiator is if you have access to a data set that other companies don't. And the only way to get that, right, is likely through collaboration. A lot of platforms use the same, right, publicly available data. If you can find a collaboration partner that can, right, provide access to data sets that you can't really buy elsewhere, right, because the data isn't for sale, those are the opportunities right now, I think, that present the most unique differentiation collaboration for early biotech companies.
Right. Thank you. We've a few questions in the chat, so I might get to those just as we wrap up this great discussion. But I guess, yeah, access to data is maybe one thing, but a question here from the audience is around how will the future workforce develop as AI becomes more and more integrated into the drug discovery workflow? Where are you seeing the biggest skills gaps, and what should current science faculty be aware of and focus on in terms of upskilling?
I think that being educated in computer science for a biologist is going to be as important as it is in biology. And we're already seeing this with how some academic departments are organized. At risk of dating myself, when I was in school, right, the biology majors and the computer science majors didn't, visit each other's parts of campus, right? They were in distinct parts. They often, people more inclined toward math may have gone to computer science, and those not may have gone to the natural sciences. And now you're seeing that the emergence of computational biology, even things across all disciplines, computational economics, these emerging everywhere. And so how long, I think there's a front wave of people who have an education in AI, which are able to come out the gate quickly and be able to contribute in these roles. In the meantime, we need to be sure, again, those communication skills between the people from the different disciplines is really there until such point as we have a workforce that is educated in both. So I think that in general, we need to see more technical skills across the industry.
Okay. Any additions from you, Katie or Kevin, on the skills gaps?
Maybe I'll make one comment. I think probably, again, close to what Armen said, but the integration of computer science or data analysis, data science into the wet lab work is really critical in those cases. There's a lot of data that's being generated in the labs now, and this data needs to be really carefully curated for sure, and then analyzed, and the insights need to be still extracted very often by very smart scientists. So being able to access the data is one thing, being able to analyze it properly is another one, and then being able to make decisions about it is the next critical thing. So being able to build teams that are very efficient, very fluid, to navigate those different steps or areas is key, and really probably steering away from the silos that we might have seen in the past.
Okay. I have another question in the chat, and I think this will be a great one to wrap up on. This person is curious to get your thoughts on whether AI across drug discovery might challenge the role and future, dare he say, dominance of big pharma. What are your thoughts?
Well, big pharma, I think, plays right. The drugs that I've worked on have spanned almost a 40-year lifespan, right? So there's going to have to be some companies that take drugs from the start to the finish. I think before, you didn't see smaller companies running phase 1 or phase 2 clinical trials because the resources available weren't there. I'm actually excited that companies can continue to carry forward projects into the clinic, and it doesn't have to be big pharma. We only have so many resources available. The more companies that are able to take good drugs into the clinic, it's going to be better for patients all around. But most companies that want to do early stage drug discovery don't want to build a commercial organization. So I think what you're going to see, I don't know that there'll be new big pharma companies pop up, but what you'll see are more collaborations along the way, where I don't want to do everything. And again, to the skill gap, it's not that we couldn't find people or hire people or build out the skill sets internally, but just because I can do it doesn't mean I should do it. If I can work with partners who can help get faster medicines to patients, it's not so much dominance. Before, big pharma was the only entity that could get drugs from a twinkle in a scientist's eye to available on the pharmacy shelf. Now that there can be more players in that mix, hopefully we can all collaborate, and ultimately the patients will win if they have better medicines and access to them faster.
Okay.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think it's a healthy ecosystem if we can have still very well-funded, resourceful companies like the big pharmas, but at the same time, we have a very dynamic and vibrant ecosystem of biotech companies that just bring innovation and then find ways to work with the larger player or the smaller players, because also the small companies grow at some point and become bigger, and then it's really about finding strategic partners to bring those molecules to the clinic. There's a framework we'll have to work with regardless in the end.
Great. Armen, I'll leave the concluding thoughts to you.
Sure. Rising tide lifts all the boats, right? So if there's more great molecules that come forward from startups and it makes everyone better, we all win, and especially patients, right? So that's what the name of the game is.
Nice. Well, thank you all so very much. I thought this was a great discussion. Hopefully the audience thought so too. So please join us again for another webinar in the future. You can find information on upcoming webinars and digital health meetings on the HealthXl platform, as well as the HealthXl website. But for now, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.